Last time on Twisted. Abby Wallace would do anything to be accepted in the Tri Gamma sorority, but her sister Gabriella couldn't care less. Gabriella doesn't feel the need to be judged by superficial snobs. Abby tries not to let her sister get to her, but she can't help it. And she won't let Gabriella change her mind. She is going to pledge and is determined to be accepted into Gamma Gamma Gamma. When Abby arrives at the sorority house, she is shocked to see Layla Sherman. Layla and Abby used to be good friends until a boy named Gordon came between them. Abby wanted to leave her old life behind her, and what right did Layla have to enter into her new world? After Abby entered the house, she heard a familiar voice calling her name. It was Nina, another old friend from Abby's past. They had been friends since they were 10 years old, but their friendship had started to struggle during middle school, and by high school, they had become two totally different people. But now, with Layla glaring at Abby from across the room, Abby was glad to see another familiar face. As the two girls begin to catch up, Nina tells Abby that Layla is her roommate. After their conversation, Nina offered to meet up with Abby later for coffee. During the meeting, Andrea Vollner, the president of Gamma Gamma Gamma, led the meeting. She introduced the other sorority officers. As Andrea continued talking, Abby began to let her mind wander back to the events of the past involving her and Layla. She hoped that going out for coffee with Nina would give her a little more information on Layla and Gordon. Eventually, Andrea's words broke into Abby's thoughts. Andrea began telling the girls what the sorority expected of them. She tells them that only 5 girls will be accepted into the sorority. She explains the importance of the sorority, that the Tri Gamma sisters are sisters for life, that only the girls who are willing to completely commit themselves will be accepted. She tells the girls that in order to be accepted into the sorority, they must all leave the campus and commit a crime to bind them together for life. Later that night, after the meeting, Abby met up with Nina for coffee. They discussed whether or not Andrea was being serious about the crime they were expected to commit. Abby seemed to think it was a joke, or at least believed the crime would be a harmless one. Nina, on the other hand, wasn't so convinced. As they continued to talk, the conversation slowly moved on to Layla and Gordon. Nina told Abby that she was worried about Layla. She tells Abby that one night, as she was heading back to her dorm, she noticed Gordon's car in the parking lot. As she walked by the car, she saw Layla and Gordon in the back seat. Nina knew how much trouble Layla could be in if she got caught. Eventually, they were interrupted by Jessie. She recognized Abby and Nina from the meeting. Jessie began asking about their thoughts on the crime. Jessie seemed excited about it and hoped that the crime was for real. Abby and Nina seemed to be put off by Jessie's behavior. They quickly ended the conversation and told Jessie that they had to leave. After they walked out into the street, Abby looked back in through the window at Jessie as she was waiting for her food. She began twirling her knife around in her hand, and Abby saw the strangest smile on Jessie's face. Chapter 5. Hi, Layla. I was hoping you'd be here. Nina pulled off her down vest and red wool muffler and tossed them across the small, cluttered dorm room onto her unmade bed. She leaned against the door and tried to catch her breath. Oh, wow. I ran all the way. She couldn't wait to tell Layla about Abby and hear Layla's opinion of the pledge meeting. Layla stood in the middle of the room, hands on her waist, her thumbs tucked into the belt loops of her dress, glaring at Nina. She hadn't changed into more comfortable clothes, even though it was nearly 2 hours since the meeting had ended. Where have you been? She asked, sounding more like an angry parent than a roommate. Hey, what's wrong? Nina asked, taking a few steps away from the door. Where have you been? Layla repeated, without moving or changing her angry expression. Uh-oh, Nina thought. She'd seen Layla angry before. She always started off quietly, with clenched teeth and a cold, hard stare that could cut through steel, and then she'd explode. Nina could never figure out why Layla thought she had the right to get so furious at her friends. Maybe it was because she was an only child and never really had to control her temper, Nina thought. She lifted a stack of books off the room's only armchair and sat down, preparing herself for the explosion to come. I went for coffee with Abby, she said, trying to stare back at Layla, but looking down at the brown shag rug instead. That figures, Layla said, moving her thumbs furiously back and forth through the wide belt loops at her sides. What do you mean? Nina cried, trying not to sound whiny and upset. What have you been out of shape about? It figures that you'd go out for coffee with my biggest enemy in the world. Enemy? Despite her attempts to keep it down, Nina's voice rose several octaves. Layla, what happened between you and Abby? That was at least a year ago. I'm sure Abby has forgotten all. No one has forgotten anything, Layla said. Now there was more sadness than anger in her voice. Tears formed in her eyes. She shook her head hard, as if trying to shake away her feelings. She hates me, Layla cried. Abby hates me, and I don't blame her. I have Gordon, and she doesn't. Don't you remember anything, Nina? Doesn't anything ever penetrate that little girl world you live in? Abby was so upset when Gordon decided he liked me better. Her mother had to take her out of school for nearly a year. She had told everyone that Abby had gone to live with her grandmother for a while. I remember, Nina said quietly, her eyes still on the small brown rug. It was a long time ago. Abby's okay now. Really, I haven't forgotten, Layla screamed. Believe me, Abby hasn't either. I just had coffee with her. I didn't... Nina hated herself for sounding so apologetic. She had every right to have coffee with anyone she wanted to. Struggling to control her anger, she squeezed the worn arms of the chair until her knuckles turned white. Layla, you can't be angry because I had a cup of coffee with Abby. What's really bugging you? Nina expected the question to catch Layla off guard, to interrupt her fury for just a second, but it only seemed to make Layla angrier. She raised a hand up, tossed her long braid behind her shoulder, and swung around. She took 3 quick steps to her dresser, picked up a small brown leather case, and tossed it as hard as she could at Nina. Here, I got you a present. Hey, don't, Nina cried, ducking away. The case hit the arm of Nina's chair and bounced onto the rug at her feet. Go ahead, pick it up, Layla challenged from across the room. Nina leaned forward and reached for it, keeping her eyes on her roommate. What is it? The perfect gift for you, binoculars. Nina dropped the case as if it were hot and sat back in the chair. What's with you, Layla? What are you talking about? Layla's beautiful heart-shaped mouth curled into a sneer. They're for spying, Nina. Perfect for you. The next time you want to spy on Gordon and me, you'll get a much better view. Layla glared at Nina. I'm hurt, Nina, she said. I'm so hurt. Nina felt a stab of pain behind her eyes. So Layla had seen her in the parking lot. Listen, Layla, I wasn't spying. I was walking back to the room. I couldn't help it if... If what? Layla demanded. If you stopped and watched us for 20 minutes? I did not, Nina screamed. She could feel herself losing control now, and she didn't care. Why were you in the parking lot, Layla? What were you trying to do? You're so crazy about Gordon, you don't care what happens to you. You don't care about anything. You're jealous, that's it. Since Nina was the one screaming now, Layla lowered her voice to an angry whisper. You're just jealous. Why don't you admit it? You've never even had a boyfriend, have you? Have you? The stab of pain behind her eyes had become a full-fledged headache. Nina rubbed her eyes, tried to rub away the pain. I don't have to answer that. You don't have to do anything, Layla said, her voice still a shuddering whisper. She grabbed her fur coat off her bed with a violent sweep of her hand and started quickly toward the door. But one of us has to leave. I'm not rooming with a spy, an enemy. Layla, stop. Just stop. This is ridiculous. We have to talk this out. There's nothing more to say, Layla said. She slammed the door behind her. For a long time after Layla left, Nina sat in the armchair, staring down at the binocular case, trying to rub away her headache. This just wasn't fair, she thought. How could Layla do this to her? She had looked forward to this night for so long. The first pledge meeting of the Trigams, and 2 of her oldest friends were there with her. It should have been exciting. It should have been fun. She buried her head in her arm and fought to keep back the tears. Why didn't anything ever work out the way she imagined it would? The front door clicked quietly as Abby closed it behind her and stepped into the living room. The house was dark and silent. She stood by the door for a long while, smiling and listening to the silence. She was relieved that her mother had gone to bed. She didn't really feel like telling her about the meeting or about seeing Nina and Layla. The air was thick and pungently sweet. Abby remembered a vase of wilting flowers on the coffee table she had forgotten to toss out. The scent was bringing back a memory. Where was it? Where was she when she had smelled that same decaying flower smell? What are you smiling about? The loud voice, so close to her, made Abby cry out. Gabriella, I didn't know you were... Why are you sitting in the dark? Gabriella laughed. She enjoyed startling her sister. I like the dark. It's pitch black in here, Abby said, her heart still pounding. How can you see me smiling? I know you, Gabriella said mysteriously. Well, don't sneak up on me like that, Abby said angrily. Gabriella laughed again, a deep, throaty laugh. Tell me about the meeting. Why, so you can make fun of it? Abby had no patience for Gabriella. She just wanted to go up to her room, lie down on her bed, and sift through her thoughts. She needed to figure out how she felt about everything that had happened, to put everything in order in her mind. Me? Make fun of you? Gabriella said innocently. Really, Gabriella, I'm in no mood for your sarcasm, Abby said, keeping her voice down so she wouldn't wake her mother. And I don't want to fight with you. Me either, Gabriella said. She reached to turn on a lamp. Don't turn that on. I'm going right to bed, Abby told her. Come on, tell me everything. No, stop. Abby started toward the stairs. Then just tell me one thing, Gabriella said. Gabriella, please. Why was her sister always such a pest? Just tell me what you think about the crime, Gabriella said, suddenly whispering. Do you think it's for real? Good night, Abby said, ignoring the questions. And don't follow me. She began running quickly up the stairs. She stopped near the top landing. How did Gabriella know about the crime? She wasn't at the meeting. How did she know? Abby didn't have a chance to find out the answer. She climbed the rest of the stairs, flicked on the light in her room, and found someone waiting for her there. Chapter 6. Gordon, what are you doing here? Abby's voice came out tiny and choked. She looked shocked enough to scream. Gordon lifted himself off her bed quickly, stepped forward, and clamped a hand gently over her mouth. His hand felt rough and hot. Shh, Abby, don't scream, he whispered. Then, slowly, he removed his hand. For an instant, she realized she wanted him to keep it there. She took a step back. Gordon, I don't believe this. Shh. He grinned at her, his face inches from hers. She took another step back, turned, and closed the bedroom door. How did you get in? Still grinning, he pointed to the window. Climbed, he said. Then he shrugged. She stared at him, trying to make sure it was really him. Not a look-alike, not a ghost, not a daydream figure come to life, a figure sprung from overactive imagination. But Gordon was too big to be an illusion. He was tall, over 6 feet, and muscular, built like a football player, although he never played. His jeans were faded and torn at one knee. His sweatshirt had a grease stain down the left sleeve. It looked as if he'd been wearing it for weeks. Gordon's brown hair was long and fell in unwashed disarray nearly to his shoulders. Patches of dark stubble dotted his jutting jaw. His narrow blue eyes, set a bit too close to his nose, still seemed to be mocking everything they saw. He still looks like Sean Penn, Abby decided. Like a big, unwashed Sean Penn. As she stared at him, he seemed to lose confidence. His grin faded. He shoved his big hands into his jean pockets. He glanced back at the window from which he had entered, as if maybe he was thinking about leaving. How long have you been here? Abby whispered. A while. How did you know What made you think? Layla, he said, looking at the window again. He never was much of a talker, Abby remembered, but those one-word answers were driving her bananas. Well, what do you want? She asked impatiently. Her sharpness seemed to hurt him. He shrugged again. It was his turn to stare at her. I had to explain. She waited for him to go on, but he didn't. Looking at him in the shadowy light from the small lamp on her bed table, she felt all mixed up. Attracted to him, repelled by him, frightened of him. If only he would talk. Gordon, you had to explain what? He picked up a lipstick on her dressing table and then put it back without looking at it. You know, I felt bad. You came to apologize to me? He picked up the lipstick again and began twirling it between his long fingers. Well, yeah, I guess. Explain, apologize, you know. Abby angrily grabbed the lipstick from his hand and slammed it onto the tabletop. There's nothing to explain, Gordon. Go home, okay? His eyes went back to the window. Come on, Abby. I'll go in a second. I don't know. Last year, I was just immature, I guess. I mean, I wasn't ready. I didn't mean to hurt you or anything. Well, you did hurt me. A lot. She surprised herself with this bitter reply. Surprised and frightened herself. There were feelings she'd long held deep down that she wanted to keep deep down. I know. That's why I came to apologize. Gordon's voice trembled. She'd never heard him sound so real. Her mind flashed suddenly on the night he had burned his foot. She pictured the bonfire, the kids in their down coats, mufflers, bright woolly gloves, their faces glowing orange and red, reflecting the blazing, crackling fire, the cheerleaders, the happy voices, the chants and cheers echoing off the stadium wall. Was it homecoming or just a big pep rally? No, it was homecoming that Gordon had decided to pull his goofy, stupid stunt. She could see him clearly. She was standing so close to the fire when he did it. She saw him take a running start, heard him screaming, "Geronimo!" at the top of his lungs, saw his wild face, his crazy eyes, and realized at once that he had planned to leap over the fire. "Stop him!" she had yelled, but no one could hear her over the cheering, the laughter, the happy shouts. "Geronimo!" She saw him leap, heard gasps of surprise, then gasps of horror. His shoe was on fire. Crazy fool. Crazy Gordon. He rolled on the stadium grass. They stomped it out. They found a tarp to cover him. It must have hurt like crazy. But Crazy Gordon never let on. He never cried out. He never uttered a word. It was unreal. Crazy Macho Gordon couldn't let on that he was in pain. He had a little bit of a limp now, but the foot was okay. If it hurt him, he'll still never let on. Why was Abby remembering all this? Because now he was letting on. Now he was being real. "Anyway," he said, his voice still unsteady. "That's all, I guess." She took a step toward him, then another. She threw her arms around his neck and pushed her lips, burning lips, against his. Am I really doing this, she thought. Then she stopped thinking. She closed her eyes and kissed him harder, again, tightening her arms around his neck. Gordon stepped back, tried to pull away, but soon he was returning her kiss. Abby began to think to herself, if Layla ever finds out, she'll kill me. Chapter 7. The house, set back in the woods at the end of Dune Road, could have been the setting for Amityville Horror, or some other horror movie. The bus bumped up the rutted dirt driveway, past gnarled old trees that shivered and entwined around each other as if they were afraid of the dark. The headlights cut through thick fog, avoiding the only light. From her window seat, Abby could see a shadowy carpet of leaves on the ground, shifting, rolling, separating as if invisible creatures were running over them. Her first glimpse of the house, so dark, so rambling and run down, so eerily perched on a desolate, forested dune, gave her a growing feeling of dread. "Couldn't we stay at a Holiday Inn?" Jessie called from the back of the bus. A few girls laughed, short and nervous laughs, but most of them had already learned to ignore Jessie's loud remarks and odd attempts at humor. The engine whined as the bus began to climb the final steep incline that curved up to the front of the house. Abby held her watch up close to her face and struggled to steady it and read it in the dark. 10:15. The ride from the Trigam house had seemed really long, partly because of heavy traffic on the expressway, partly because of Jessie's insistence on trying to make funny comments about everything they passed, and partly because of uncertainty of where they were going and what they were about to do. "Come on, people. It's time to prove that you're Trigams," was all Andrea had said back on the campus as she ushered them up onto the old yellow minibus. They'd had no idea they'd be heading out to the ocean, and to this deserted wreck of a mansion so far from town, so far from anything. But the uncertainty of their destination wasn't the only cause of tension on the bus. Abby saw immediately that Nina and Layla weren't speaking to each other. Upon boarding, Layla had flashed Nina a real look of hate, a look so intense it actually made Abby turn her head away. "I hope no one ever looks at me that way," Abby told herself. Then she remembered Gordon that night in her room. Was it a week ago already? His kisses, and in between the kisses, his words of apology, of regret. If Layla only knew, Abby said to herself, she would hate me too. But what were Layla and Nina fighting about? Probably some silly squabble about their dorm room, Abby thought. She couldn't picture the two of them living together at all. Layla was so tidy and neat, so together, so cool and sophisticated, and Nina was always such a slob, such a kid. As they boarded the rented mini school bus, Layla looked past Nina, flashed Abby a quick phony smile, and kept walking down the narrow aisle, taking a seat near the back. Rebecca climbed in beside Nina. The two of them began chattering and laughing, their high scratchy voices reminding Abby of those cartoon chipmunks on TV. A girl named Emily introduced herself and took the seat beside Abby. She was kind of pretty in an ordinary, everyday pretty kind of way. She seemed gun-ho about everything. Loved Rockland State, loved the Trigams, loved her courses, loved the other pledges, loved the North Shore, loved the idea of going somewhere to commit a crime. She thought it was all a lark, just a funny sorority prank, and she loved the whole idea. Abby tried to keep a conversation going with Emily, but it was hard to keep up the level of enthusiasm it took to talk to such a tirelessly cheerful person. The silences became longer and more awkward, and soon both girls gave up and stared out the bus window, watching the fog settle on the sides of the expressway. A lot of the girls were finding it difficult to make conversation. It was hard to keep the purpose of the trip from their minds. They weren't off on a fun vacation trip, a weekend frolic, Before the weekend was out, they were supposed to commit a crime, a serious crime, according to Andrea, who would be accompanying them, watching them, not only an accomplice, but a judge. 3 girls had refused to come along, had simply given up their chances of becoming trigams. Most of the remaining 7, judging from the conversations Abby overheard on the bus, believed the whole thing to be a goof, a joke they had to play along with to prove they were good sports. Only Jessie, of course, seemed excited about actually having the chance to commit a crime. How did Abby feel about it? She tried to sort out her thoughts as the bus rumbled along the expressway, but she couldn't come to any decision. She felt uncomfortable. That was all. They were nearing the end of the expressway, the final exit, where they would turn onto the local road that led to the Dune Road, when the bus suddenly squealed to a stop. Traffic normally wasn't heavy this far out of town. What could be tying things up? Staring through the billowing fog, Abby could make out a car on the side of the road. Its headlights were on high beam. Its doors had been flung open. The 2 occupants of the car, a large man in a bulky tan overcoat and a young boy, were in front of the car, in the glare of the white headlights, and they were hunched over what appeared to be a huge brown sack. No, wait, it wasn't a sack they were examining. Abby stared harder. It was an animal, a deer. "Oh no, it's dead, they killed it," Abby heard Nina cry out. A few other girls uttered cries of surprise and revulsion. The deer must have run out onto the highway, and the car had struck it. Now it lay on its side, unmoving, a dead heap, nothing but a big brown sack. The man and the boy were walking around it, still hunched over, shaking their heads. "Oh, look, a deer crossing sign right next to it," Jessie called out. "Isn't that ironic?" "Jessie, really?" Andrea called from her seat beside the bus driver. No one else said anything. The traffic began to move again. The bus jerked forward, backfired, jerked again, and then began to move away. Abby kept picturing this innocent creature taking a quick, clean leap onto the highway, and then thud. She felt worse than uncomfortable now. This was where her feelings of dread began, long before she saw the spooky old mansion on the dune. Again and again she saw the innocent creature, the leap, the hit. The girls on this bus were all innocent creatures too, she told herself. Hey, Abby, such weird thoughts. Don't lose control, girl. Got to keep control. She forced herself to stop thinking about it. Think about Gordon instead. She could change her thoughts, but she couldn't rid herself of the feeling that crept up from the pit of her stomach, that tightened the muscles in the back of her neck, that made her shiver even though it was hot and steamy inside the bus. Now the long, uncomfortable ride was over, and they were inside the old mansion. "Close the door. Don't let the cold in," Andrea yelled. She flicked a row of switches, and the whole house seemed to light up. Abby smiled, happy to be out of the darkness. The house wasn't as bad as the outside had led them to believe. It was well lit and cheerfully decorated with surprisingly modern, comfortable-looking furniture, and it was warm and dry. She took a few steps into the living room and looked beyond it to a long dining room. Not bad, she thought. No broken windows, no creaking floors, no bats or creepy-looking housekeepers appearing out of nowhere. Maybe this won't be a horror show after all, Abby thought, unsnapping her down jacket. If the Trigams were going to take you out to a deserted mansion to commit a crime, at least they did it in style and comfort. "Okay, people." Andrea herded everyone into the big living room. "I have the room assignments here." She pulled a yellow sheet of paper from her coat pocket. "The driver will bring in your bags. Your rooms are all upstairs. I think you can find them yourselves." She began to read her list. Nina and Rebecca were rooming together. Emily and a very quiet girl named Ruby were roommates for the night. Abby felt the dread returning. What if... "Layla and Abby in room 212, Andrea said. It had happened. She and Layla. No. Should she say something? But what? What excuse could she give for not wanting to room with Layla? She glanced over at Layla, who smiled back at her, a warm smile that seemed almost genuine. Oh well, it's just for a night or two. They could just avoid talking about anything real. It wouldn't be so bad. She smiled back at Layla. "Wait just a doggone minute here," someone was yelling. Who would talk like that? Abby looked around. Oh, it was Jessie. "Wait a doggone minute," Jessie repeated. "I need my privacy." What? What do you mean? Andrea tried not to sound exasperated, but she couldn't help it. "I need my own room, to myself," Jessie said, as if Andrea should have understood it from the beginning. There were giggles and whispered remarks around the big living room, all of them at Jessie's expense. Andrea stared at her list. "Okay, Jessie. Room 233 is empty because Charlotte and Ruth decided not to join us. You can have that room." "Good," Jessie said. as if an injustice had been righted. "Get some sleep, guys," Andrea said, folding up the list and jamming it back into her coat pocket. "Tomorrow we have some important scouting to do." The girls all headed toward the stairway. Layla, still smiling warmly, leaned against the mahogany banister and waited for Abby. Abby tried to smile back, but her mouth wouldn't cooperate. "Hi, Layla. I hope you don't plan on having a long chat tonight," Layla said, covering a yawn with her hand. Abby couldn't help but notice her perfect, long, blood-red fingernails. "I'm totally wrecked." "No, I mean, so am I." Abby hoped she didn't sound too grateful. "Maybe we can catch up on each other's lives tomorrow," Layla said, actually sounding friendly. "I just can't keep my eyes open. I guess it was the bus ride. I don't know." "Fine, great," Abby said, feeling a little silly. She followed Layla up the long staircase to their room. This trip has already had one surprise, Abby thought. Layla was nice to me. A few minutes later, she fell asleep wondering what other surprises were in store. In the summertime, vacationers and summer people filled the narrow main street of the little town, trying on bathing suits and chic summer gear in the trendy boutiques with names like Seaworthy and Dune Fine, buying backyard furniture, pastel-shaded posters, and barbecue grills for their summer houses, and lunching on shrimp salad and pasta in the outdoor cafes and small restaurants. But in the fall, the streets were nearly empty. The summer people had packed up their bikes and tennis gear and gone home, and most of the stores were closed and boarded up. "It's so empty. It's like a movie set," Layla said to Abby as they crossed the carless street. Layla was being super friendly to Abby. Abby was relieved. Layla's easygoing chit-chat, as if the two of them were the best of friends, as if nothing had happened between them, was making the weekend a lot easier. "Look at those dogs," Abby said, laughing. Two scraggly black mutts were lying on their backs in the middle of the main street, looking as if they owned the town. "Try to keep up," Andrea called from up ahead. The girls obediently quickened their pace. Andrea had had the driver park the bus at the big lot at the edge of town near the railroad tracks, even though there were parking places all up and down Main Street. "I want to walk you through town so you can memorize where everything is," she had said, sounding very serious and businesslike. "Memorize everything. Your life may depend on it." "Look out," Jessie cried as she stepped off the bus. "We're bad. We're bad. Here comes the Gamma 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 gang." Andrea just rolled her eyes and motioned for everyone to follow. They walked past Dell's Deli and the old-fashioned New Fashion store, both boarded up. A strong wind blew through the street, carrying a cold and wet chill from the ocean nearby. A boy of about 10 or 11, in just jeans and a t-shirt, came speeding by on a beat-up racing bike. "Hey, don't you need a coat?" Jessie yelled after him. "I'm not cold," the boy cried without slowing down. Everyone laughed. Nervous laughter. At the far end of the street, Andrea stopped in front of a large store with a bulky solid oak coffee table in the window. "Here we are," she said, smiling and pointing at the hand-painted sign above the door. "Driftwood Antiques." A sign taped to the glass door said "Open." Andrea pulled open the door and motioned everyone inside. The store was quite large, but there was little room to walk around. It was filled with antique furniture of all description, huge cabinets and wardrobes, hand-carved desks, dining room tables, solid-looking furniture of rich wood, all of which appeared to weigh at least a ton. Andrea made her way past a crushed velvet Victorian sofa to the far wall. There, several glass display cases offered an array of antique jewelry. Abby and Layla looked at each other. "You're right. This has to be a movie set. It can't be real," Abby said. Layla ran her hand over the surface of a round cocktail table sculpted of dappled marble. "Just the kind of light, breezy furniture to put in your summer home," she said sarcastically. "Hey, anyone home?" Jessie called. "There's no one minding the store." "Jessie, please," Andrea started. But the store owner stepped out from a tiny back office. She was a small, elderly woman, her white hair tied in a bun, wearing an attractive violet suit. She was carrying some sort of ledger book, which she dropped in surprise when she saw that the store was filled with young women. "Oh my, I didn't know." She had a surprisingly young voice for someone who looked to be at least 65 or 70. Andrea bent down quickly and picked up the book for her. "Thank you. I didn't expect... I wasn't going to open up today. There are so few people around." She set the ledger down on the marble cocktail table. "We're cheerleaders. We're on a bus trip from our college in Pennsylvania," Andrea told her. It was a well-rehearsed lie. It sounded completely true. "How nice," the woman said, her smile revealing lipstick-stained teeth. "I'm Maria Driftwood. Yes, that's really my name. I'm the only driftwood you'll find in this store." She laughed. Sounded like a little girl laugh. Well, it's a beautiful store, Andrea said. We were all admiring the jewelry. Miss Driftwood started to say something, but the phone in the back office suddenly rang. Oh, excuse me. Look around, girls. I'll be right back. She began scurrying through the maze of tables and sofas to get to the back office. Coming, I'm coming. Andrea smiled after her until she disappeared into the back office. Then her earnest, businesslike expression immediately returned. There's the side entrance, she said, quietly pointing. And there's the cash register. Memorize everything. Everything. We're doing our crime here? Nina cried, in a high, little voice. That's right, Nina, Andrea said. Her usual colorless eyes seemed to light up at the thought. Tomorrow, we're coming back here for those jewels you see in those cases, and all the money in the cash register. But, Nina started. Not another word, Andrea said quietly, her eyes still blazing. You can talk at the meeting tonight, when we decide who gets to carry the gun. Chapter 8. Wow, it's a lot like old times, isn't it? Nina said, but the jump of her voice made it more of a question than a statement. You and Layla seem to be getting along fine. Abby put the old copy of Glamour down on her lap, raised her arms above her head, and stretched. Yeah, isn't that weird? Uh-huh, Nina agreed. It's weird, I guess. Two other girls, Emily and the girl named Ruby, who was dark and exotic, the exact opposite of Emily, wandered into the living room and settled onto a red leather love seat near the flickering light of the fireplace. Abby couldn't help but smile. Ruby appeared to be having difficulty keeping a conversation going with Emily, too. Well, be careful, Abby, Nina continued. What? Watching the girls across the room, Abby had lost the thread of the conversation. About what? About Layla. Don't trust her. Nina's freckled face tightened into a concerned frown. Nina looks so funny when she tries to be serious, Abby thought. You two have a fight or something? Abby asked her, a bit too loudly. Emily looked away from the fireplace and gave Abby a little wave. Rebecca entered the room, looking even taller than usual, in tight green, straight-legged jeans. She was wearing a Walkman and walking in time to the music she was hearing. Snapping her fingers loudly, she settled down on the rug in front of the fire, a long green grasshopper. Yeah, Nina said, still frowning. You know Layla. She can really blow up. She'll get over it, Abby told her, seeing that Nina was really upset about it. I don't think so, Nina said. I don't think Layla gets over things, Abby. I know I'm not being too subtle or anything, but don't trust her. Don't think she really wants to be your friend again just because she's being nice. Something about Abby's eyes made Nina stop talking. Nina looked away and broke the connection. Abby saw Layla enter the room, looking stunning in jeans and a plain gray sweatshirt, her gleaming hair unbraided, falling carelessly around her face. Layla looked around the room, didn't seem to see Abby and Nina, or pretended not to see them, and then walked quickly toward Emily and Ruby to claim the armchair across from them. The armchair seat cushion was deep and soft, and as Layla sank down, it looked as if she were being swallowed whole by the chair. That made Nina laugh. Layla struggling to pull herself up to a comfortable position, glaring straight ahead at the fire, pretending not to hear Nina's giggle. What's so funny? Abby asked. Nina turned back to her. She was relieved to see that Abby's eyes had returned to normal. Nothing, Nina told her. What did you and Layla fight about? Abby asked. Which of you left a hair on her comb? Nina giggled again. She liked it when people said sarcastic things. She never knew how to be sarcastic herself. Oh, what's the point? She said, shrugging her small shoulders. Remember I told you about her and Gordon in the parking lot? Well, she thinks I was spying on them. Gordon. The word sent a flash of warmth to Abby's cheeks. Was she blushing? She pictured Gordon waiting for her in her bedroom, kissing her. Again. Yeah, you're right, Abby said aloud. What? Nina was confused. Oh, sorry, Abby said, shaking her head. I was thinking of something else. Nina was right. Layla could never be her friend again. Okay, people, it's 8 o'clock. Are we ready for our meeting? Andrea burst into the room, walking at her usual full speed, as chipper as ever. You'd think she had come to organize a bake sale or to start rehearsals on a school play instead of to plan an armed hold-up. She walked quickly up to the front of the room and stood with her back to the fire. Everyone comfortable? She surveyed the room, smiling brightly. The fire seemed to radiate around her. For a moment, it looked to Abby as if Andrea was the source of the fire. Then it looked as if Andrea had been consumed by the darting, dancing flames.
Her form became shadowy and indistinct. She seemed to flicker and fold with the flames. Abby closed her eyes. When she opened them, Andrea had moved to the side of the fireplace. "Hey, where's Jessie?" she asked, looking at her watch. "Haven't seen her," Rebecca's little mouse voice called. "Anybody seen her?" Andrea asked. "Here I am," Jessie called from the entranceway. "I guess my watch stopped." She held up her bare arm. "It still says 3 hairs past 6. She laughed, but no one else did. "Jessie, please try to be on time," Andrea scolded. "It won't do tomorrow if someone is late. Our timing must be perfect." "Is there any other soap we can use?" Jessie asked. "The soap in the bathroom is too harsh. It hurts my skin." "Jessie," Andrea groaned, sounding really out of patience. "We're not here to talk about soap now. We're talking about tomorrow. It's really important that we all know the plan and know what we're doing. And if you want to talk about soap—" "What if we screw up tomorrow?" Layla asked suddenly. The question, from a new voice, seemed to confuse Andrea, but only for a moment. She turned to Layla, who had draped one leg over the arm of the big armchair, and took a few steps toward her. "We don't screw up," Andrea said flatly. The phrase seemed odd coming from her perfect little mouth. She raised herself up on tiptoe, then quickly came back down. "No group of Tri-Gamma pledges have ever screwed up. No one has ever been caught. No crime has ever been solved." She started to go back to her place beside the fire, but Layla wasn't finished. "A lot of us think it's all a joke," she said. It was a nervy thing to say, something all of the girls in the big living room wanted to hear said. "Then a lot of you will be in for a big surprise," Andrea replied, looking around the room. "But you don't really mean—" Layla started. Andrea held up a hand to stop her in mid-sentence. "Being accepted into the sorority isn't a joke," she said, pronouncing each word slowly and carefully. "The traditions of the Tri-Gams are old and tested and true. Also not a joke. When we say we want to bind you to us, to make you Tri-Gams for life, that isn't a joke. And... She walked quickly up to a tall cabinet against the wall, removed a key from around her neck, and unlocked a small compartment in the base of the cabinet. "Here," Andrea cried triumphantly. She held up a silver pistol. It seemed to shimmer in the flame of the firelight. "This isn't a joke either, Layla," she said, holding the pistol tightly in her hand, raising it high so everyone could see it. "It's real. It's very real. And one of you lucky girls will soon find out how real it is." Up on tiptoes again, Andrea placed the pistol down carefully on the tall mantelpiece. When she turned back to face everyone, her calm and her smile had returned. "Are there any other questions?" Silence. "Can we talk about the soap later?" Jessie asked from the back of the room. This time everyone laughed. Jessie was certainly great for breaking the tension. But Andrea didn't seem to want the tension broken. She ignored Jessie and launched into the plan for the hold-up. At first, Abby found it amusing that this prim-looking, Miss Perfect sorority girl type would be talking so glibly about putting fake license plates on the bus, catching the store owner off guard, subduing and tying her up, assigning lookouts for the 2 doors, and using separate escape routes if anyone should intrude. But Andrea seemed so involved, so carried away by it all, so high from it. Abby's amusement soon turned to disgust. Despite Andrea's heated assurances, Abby still believed the whole thing was a joke. But the way Andrea was handling it, in Abby's opinion, had turned it into a very nasty joke, a completely unpleasant and unsettling experience. And what was the point of that? "Okay, everyone draw straws," Andrea said, holding up the dark-colored straws the way she held the pistol. "Short straw carries the pistol." She stepped up to Ruby and pushed her closed fist of straws toward her. "No," Ruby said, shaking her head, long dangling earrings shaking with her. "Take a straw," Andrea insisted. "No," Ruby said quietly. "I won't. I'm not going to do it." "You're not going to join us tomorrow?" Andrea sounded more hurt than surprised. "No," Ruby said, more determined with each refusal. She stared back at Andrea. "No, I'm not coming. I think it's stupid, the whole thing." Andrea took a step back without lowering the fistful of straws. "But Ruby, come on. You can't be accepted. You can't be a Tri-Gam unless you join us." "I know," Ruby said, quickly getting up. "I'm sorry. I just don't want to. I can't. Sorry. I'll call my friend to come pick me up tonight." "No," Andrea said, looking toward the fire. "You can't do that." "Why not?" Ruby cried, suddenly sounding a little afraid. "There's no phone," Andrea said, offering her the straws one more time. "No," Ruby said, standing awkwardly just a few inches from Andrea. "Sorry." "I'm sorry too," Andrea said, giving Ruby an odd half smile. "You'll have to wait here at the house until it's time to leave. You don't want to come to town with us, and there are no houses near enough to walk to." "Well, okay," Ruby said uncertainly. "I'll wait here." "What about the cops?" Jessie said loudly. "Do you have a plan for dealing with them, Andrea?" Andrea held the straws in front of Rebecca, who quickly reached up from her place on the rug and pulled out a long one. Rebecca laughed giddily and tossed the straw into the fire. "The police pretty much closed down at the end of summer, too," Andrea said, moving on to Emily. "There may be a few on duty, but they'll probably be out on highway detail. They're pretty old and fat. They're no sweat." Without thinking, Abby laughed out loud. It just struck her funny that Andrea, in her crew neck Esprit sweater and pleated skirt, would be trying to talk so tough. Nina gave Abby an odd look, but no one else seemed to notice. Everyone was concentrating on Andrea's fist and the remaining straws. Layla pulled a long one. Jessie, holding one hand over her eyes as a blindfold, and starting to pull the first one, changing her mind, trying another, then a third, pulled a long one. "Your turn, Nina," Andrea said, grinning. Abby felt her heart begin to pound. She was next. She was last. If Nina pulled a long straw, that meant... Nina pulled the short straw. She screamed at the top of her lungs, the little stub of a straw flying out of her hand. "No! No!" Andrea laughed. She sure is enjoying this, Abby thought, breathing a sigh of relief. Poor Nina. "Well, well, Nina. I guess you don't think this is all a joke, do you?" Andrea exclaimed happily. She walked over to the mantel, went up on tiptoe to retrieve the pistol, and delivered it to Nina. Nina couldn't decide whether to hold it by the handle or the barrel. It's real," she said weakly, staring at it as if it were some kind of creature that had dropped down from outer space. "Careful, it's loaded," Andrea said, a pleased grin crossing her face. Nina didn't say anything. She looked at Abby, who looked at Andrea. "If all goes well tomorrow morning," Andrea said ominously, "you won't have to use it, Nina." She paused for dramatic effect. "I hope you won't have to use it. Miss Driftwood seems like such a nice old lady." "Ruby's the only one with any guts here," Layla said disgustedly. She sat down gracefully on top of the heavy maroon bedspread and stretched. "Andrea would say that Ruby is the only coward," Abby said, flopping down in the wooden chair by the desk. The meeting had ended a few minutes before. The pledges were instructed to get right to bed, but who could sleep? Layla and Abby found themselves talking at the same time, agreeing that it was all a big joke, but they didn't agree on much else. "It's not worth it," Layla declared, lying on her back, staring up at the gold and chrome light fixture that dangled from the ceiling on a long brass chain. "Why put yourself through all this craziness?" "It's worth it," Abby said, more vehemently than she had intended. "Sure, it's a drag, but it's worth it. To be a trigam? To be the best?" Layla started to say something, but, looking at Abby's expression, thought better of it. "It means a lot to you to get in, huh?" Before Abby could answer, they both heard a loud rapping on the window pane. At first they thought it must be a tree limb battering against the glass, but a second rapping with a definite rhythm revealed that someone was at the window. As the girls stared, frightened, trying to decide whether or not to run from the room, the window opened quickly, and 2 black boots, followed by 2 blue jean legs, slid down into the room. "Gordon!" Abby cried. Grinning triumphantly, a denim motorcycle cap pulled at a slashing angle down across his forehead, Gordon hopped into the room. "You're here!" Abby cried happily, raising her arms and rushing toward him. But Gordon, grinning even broader through his 2-day stubble, stepped quickly past Abby and pulled Layla up from the bed in a big embrace. Feeling her face grow bright red and hot, Abby turned around. Layla was staring at her over Gordon's shoulder, giving her the oddest look, surprise and suspicion mixed with utter contempt. "Gordon, stop! What are you doing here?" Layla cried. I followed you. I had to," Gordon declared. "I just want to sink between the floorboards and disappear," Abby thought, trembling all over from embarrassment, from disappointment, from shame. "I just want to die."